Hello everyone, I'm Paris Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to 12 O'Clock High, a podcast on business leadership with Tom Fox, hosted by Richard Lummis.
Hello and welcome to another episode of 12 O'Clock High, a podcast about leadership. This is Richard Lummis. I'm here with Tom Fox for another discussion on how to improve our leadership skills. We believe leadership is a skill which can be improved with study of both good and bad practices, and we try to draw interesting examples from many sources, including history, fiction, film, and business writing. Welcome back, Tom.
Thank you, Richard.
Today we're going to look at an interesting example from the world of sports that relates to issues of compliance as well as employee evaluations. After going to the World Series in 2005, before being swept by the Chicago White Sox, the Houston Astros were, by 2010, one of the, if not the, worst team in baseball by many measures, including the strength of their farm system. More than once, they got 0.0 Nielsen ratings on television. As a side note, their salaries were so low that they were still profitable. But by 2001, they had a new owner, Jim Crane, who had some ideas about how to fix the performance issues. In June 2014, Ben Reiter wrote an article in Sports Illustrated titled Houston's Grand Experiment that predicted the Astros would be world champions in 2017. Although widely ridiculed at the time, it proved accurate in many respects. It's now been turned into a book, Astroball, The New Way to Win It All. Tom, what lessons can we learn from this startling turnaround, and how can we apply some of those lessons outside of baseball?
Well, Richard, thank you. Great to be back. I think we have to give some context to this. We have both been Astros fans for 55 years plus, and I certainly never thought I would live to see the Astros win the World Series. So that I think we have to acknowledge that. And we are the current reigning World Series champs, and I'm enjoying every day of that right now. Whether that will last, we will perhaps speculate later. But the book itself detailed the Astros technology strategy. And they used technology. They built upon what Billy Beane had done in Oakland. It's reported in Michael Lewis's book, Moneyball. But they took it really to a different level. And there were three major components of how they used technology. The first was in player evaluation. And here I wouldn't say they revolutionized, but what they did was tried to take the emotional part out of making a decision on players and quantifying as many factors as possible. Daryl Morley, the general manager of the Houston Rockets, was quoted in Moneyball on how difficult that is, simply because at some point you always have to interview a prospective candidate. And he found that there were many of them that he just liked so much. And he gave the example of the big man. He said he'd never met a big man he didn't like in the interview process because they had grown up as a very unique person. And much like the chubby kid in the playground, they taught people how to laugh, or they learned how to teach people. They learned how to make people laugh, and that's how they got along. And so, what the Astros did was really utilize data around player evaluation. This effort was not wholly successful, but the thing that really struck me in the book was that how Jeff Luhnow, the general manager, and his number one, Sig Mejdal, who really wasn't a rocket scientist, he worked at NASA, before he went into baseball, they really utilized the human element. They relied heavily on their scouts to view the metrics they were measuring of many of these prospects. And they did require the scouts to follow a precise form analysis, but they still allow the scouts to express their opinions within the context of the metrics they were measuring. And I thought that was a really important point that they did not, and it's a really important point for leaders going forward, because with every technological advance, every use of AI, to think that should or even can replace the human element, I think really is not correct. And that when you couple the two together, that's when you have real power.
And Tom, I think one of the things about Moneyball that struck me was it pretty much ignored some of these soft factors you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And the things the scouts are expected to do, in addition to using computer and video analysis for swing and pitching mechanics, is things like character and family background,
yes,
which I thought was very interesting.
Yes. Unfortunately, the movie really emphasized the dynamic tension between traditional scouting methods and metrics. In the book, it was really not the level of tension and conflict that was portrayed in the movies, but you're absolutely right. And from Astroball, the example most prominent was Carlos Correa. And he was Puerto Rican, is Puerto Rican, and they did extensive background research into his character, his parents, how he'd been brought up, the reasons he was so driven. And I'm going to get to Alex Bregman in a minute because the character issue, I think it really shows a great example with Bregman. Having said that, on the player evaluations, there's 3 key points I want to emphasize for our podcast listeners. The Major League Baseball draft inaugurated in 1965. Since that time, there have been 4 players drafted who did not reach the majors. 2 of those were drafted by the Astros.
You mean drafted first in the first round?
Drafted number 1.
Yeah.
4 players. 2 of those were the Astros in 2013 and 2014. So much for that.
Well, and one of those was the example that Reiter used in his article at the time of how great the system was.
Right.
And he never signed with the Astros, actually, but he's also never played in the majors.
That's correct. And the second is J.A. Martinez. And J.A. Martinez is now one of the top 3 hitters in baseball, and he was unmercilessly cut by the Astros. In 2014, he on his own had delved into metrics around baseball mechanics, and particularly his swing mechanics, and had relearned his swing. And he came to training camp, spring training, and wanted to show off that swing, at least enough to make the team. And the manager at the time, he had fallen out of favor with the manager, and over 6 weeks he got 18 at-bats. And he was cut simply because they didn't have a place for him. They didn't know what he could do. And it was pretty clear in the book that was a very big driving force when the next day he happened to actually play against the Astros with a team. He had picked him up and he hit a home run in his first at-bat. And when he flipped the bat, it landed a little close to the Astro dugout, apparently. I'm sure that was by accident. But now he plays for the Boston Red Sox, and he's their top hitter. So this is not a perfect system. It's still an evaluation. There's still a human element. Obviously, that's if you look at any football draft. But here, I just want to emphasize. But the thing that I got from this component of what the Astros did, it really was not so much the number 1 players that they used this talent evaluation tool on. It was because I think those are going to be pretty close to self-evident, and as you correctly note, I've always felt it's still a crapshoot.
Mejdal's background was in blackjack dealings.
But they really were able to fill out their roster with these players. And that gets me to Alex Bregman, who's a third baseman I'll get to a little bit later for another story or another reason. He was short, viewed as too small to play high school, too small to play college, certainly too small to play pro. And he, like many people of low stature or low height in professional sports, he internalized that, and he has made a career out of showing people and internalizing that anger and using it, turning it into a creative, positive force. And that was actually picked up by the Astro Scouts to their credit, and that Luhnow, I think accurately assessed that as a true plus for Bregman, and I think it's been true throughout his short career with the Astros, but a significant part of the World Series winning team. So that was sort of talent evaluation. Part two of how they used analytics was through player development. And this is the part that I think truly was innovative. And in the book, Reiter quoted a rival general manager who said, I think they've unlocked a lot of things on the hitting side and are more advanced in that area than anyone else. And they have determined launch angles, they've determined bat speed, and they have retrained players for more efficient mechanics. But what was made clear in the book was that the player had to be open and willing to this, and that there's some players who were not, and those players are not with the team anymore. But it doesn't stop at hitting, and here I have to point to two pitchers. The first is Dallas Keuchel, who was a perhaps above average pitcher, but won a Cy Young his second year with the Astros, and is number 2 starter now on the team. But the one that you cannot really stop talking enough about is Charlie Morton, and his development is nothing short of phenomenal. He came to the Astros as a 33-year-old journeyman with a 46-71 record, with an ERA over 4. That was in 2015. In 2016, he dropped or improved his record to 14-7. 2017, with an ERA of 3.62, and to the date of this podcast, he's 11-2 with a 2.96 ERA. Here was the correction or the change they made. They determined that Morton had 3 pitches: a curveball, a mid-90s fastball, and a sinker. And the Astros felt he was not throwing his curveball enough, so they upped the number of times he threw the curveball. That's it. And that simple adjustment. Now, obviously, he had to be willing. But there was actually a time earlier this year where one player from, I believe, the Cleveland Indians said that Morton had to be cheating. No one can improve like that.
Yeah.
I would challenge any listener to point to one pitcher who has improved that dramatically at age 33 without the help of steroids, and I don't think you can. So that kind of player development really is nothing short of phenomenal.
How much of Altuve's improvement do you think is a function of the Astros tinkering with his swing mechanics?
So that's a great question. Last year's MVP, Jose Altuve, a Venezuelan, 5'6", came up as a pretty decent slap hitter. He now routinely hits at 350, has over 200 hits the last 3 seasons, has 20 home runs, has won 3 batting championships. I think it's really part is the mechanical ability or mechanical changes. Part is Altuve's drive. He is a driven individual. 5'6", maybe that has
small strike zone,
but lots of power, and is a true clubhouse leader. And the third part is kind of into the future. Here, I think the Astros recognize that not only are they leading innovator in this, but they're trying to use technology to help change the future with both of these tools going forward. And that is going to be, it's not so much an open question, but I think something that we're going to have to follow to see what they can do. But there's a couple of other points I would like to raise with you, Richard, that I think are important for leadership. And the first one is around Alex Bregman. I was very disappointed in the book because it told a story about Bregman, and it was in Game 6 of the American League Championship playoff against New York. And the Astros were up a run, and New York had runners on first and third, I think with 1 out, and a ground ball was hit to Bregman. And he came home and he cut the New York runner down. And in the book, it said that Sig Mejdal, who was in the stands, actually calculated the odds of making that out. at home plate as less than 20%, whereas he had above a 99% chance going to first base. Reiter, the book author, Ben Reiter, attributed that to basically Bregman's screw it attitude, although he didn't use the word screw it. But this is a PG podcast, so and coming home. But that's actually not the story. Because the story is that the last week of the season, Bregman found himself in the same situation. And he took the ball and took it to first for the safe out. And after the end of the inning in the dugout, manager A.J. Hinch took him aside and said to him, there'll be a time in the playoffs when you'll have that choice. And in the playoffs, the runs magnify themselves. And so you'll need to take that play home. And and that's why he did. It wasn't because of his screw it attitude. It's because the manager had said, and this has really struck me as a true risk management strategy. In increased risk, your increased reward could either be so great, or the risk of scoring because of the heightened atmosphere of the playoffs was so great, you had to make the attempt to cut the runner down at home. So that I thought it was really a risk management strategy because it showed the flexibility of risk, how risk can change in a baseball game from one week to another when that week is ending the season or in the playoffs, and then how the play you make in the field is really determined by that risk management strategy. So I was really impacted by that.
Well, I think Hinch was correct, too, because that was really a pivotal play in terms of the psychology of the series.
So let me describe this, and then once again, since we're on a podcast, this is how close it was. And I've watched this multiple times. The Yankee player, whose name I can't remember, he came down from third base on the ground ball, and he slid in to the plate. And he could clearly see that a play was going to occur. He could clearly see the catcher, Brian McCann, was going to make a sweep tag on him. And so what he did was, when he slid with his lead leg, he kept the leg up so that it was not on the ground. And he actually slid over the plate with his leg over the plate. And as McCann caught the ball and came up, he caught his leg before it touched. If he had come down, slid with the foot down in the dirt, he would have hit the plate before the throw got him out. So it was pretty.
That's why it was a 20% play.
That's why it was 20% at best. So at any rate, obviously something we have thought about, watched, and participated in quite a bit. But the book is a great read. It's an easy read. I thought a lot of very insightful things from not only talent evaluation, talent management, talent development, risk management, leadership. As probably a freebie we ought to just throw in, when you leave a job and go to a next job, please change your password on your computer. That was part of there was a theft of intellectual property because the Astros used this, didn't change their passwords when they went to, Luhnow had been with the Cardinals, and so they had his old password and just used that on his new password to steal some stuff. That was a story in the book. So pretty interesting all the way around.
One of the other things that struck me was despite the fact that Reiter seems to like gambling as a metaphor for what they were doing, specifically the use of percentages. What really struck me was the importance of the discipline here. When they picked Brady Aiken as the first pick in the first round of the draft, they were gambling a lot. Well, eventually they couldn't agree on his signing bonus, and that's why he never signed with the Astros, which to me, they'd put all this investment into selecting him in the first place, but they still had a very strong opinion of what his actual value to the team was monetarily, and they weren't willing to break it.
So with Brady Aiken, it was colored by another factor. And that was apparently, I didn't realize this until I read this book, but in Major League Baseball, you get bare minimum medical records of draftees. Ah. And when they got Brady Aiken's medical records, it showed that the ulnar or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, the one around the elbow that is involved in Tommy John surgery, it was not injured or damaged, but it was half the size of someone his size. And so they were afraid that he would blow it out, which is exactly what happened to him in the minors, which is why he didn't make the majors. And then you overlay that with in the draft now, you're allotted a certain amount of money, and everybody gets what's called slot money. And if you can save on your top draft pick, that gives you more money for lower draft picks. And so the Astros had lined up two prospects, or one very high prospect in addition to Aiken, and they were going to pay him based on a reduced price for Aiken. That, but after they found out this medical condition, they thought it was so severe. They offered him. I think they offered him half of what they had told him they were going to offer him, and he said, bleep you, I'm not signing with you. But here's what they did to salvage that situation. There's yet another rule that if you offer some percentage, I think it's 50% of your original offer, turns out to be your final offer, you get a compensatory pick. And so that's what they made. And to you, or certainly to me at the time, it looked like they were lowballing a kid for no reason. And the Astros were not releasing information about the medical condition they found, whether because of HIPAA, Major League Baseball, or some other reason. Nevertheless, we didn't know about the medical condition. But by making the offer they did, they got a compensatory pick the next year in the first round. And they were able to use that quite successfully. So
know the rules.
So know the rules. So which maybe we can get to in another podcast. But really just chock full of these kinds of lessons that I think are really important for any business leader. But the key use of data analytics coupled with human element, I think, was the biggest takeaway that I got from this book.
Well, I think it's a great lesson, and it does show the importance, I think, of a balanced approach. You have all these scouts who spend years learning this stuff, and I think there are still some intangibles. But as you pointed out with Charlie Morton, sometimes it's just a statistical play. Anyway, for now, this is 12 O'Clock High with Tom Fox and Richard Lummis, and we hope you've enjoyed this, and listen next time.
This is Paris Fox again. We hope you enjoyed this episode of 12 O'Clock High, a podcast on business leadership with Tom Fox. If you enjoyed the show, please go to iTunes and rate the podcast. Thank you for listening.